اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد. خل المقادير تمضي لا تغالبها، فإن من غالب الأقدار مغلوب. إن القضاء لسيف لا يقاومه شيء من الخلق إلا وهو محبوب. وامشي رويدا مع الأقدار في مهل، فإن من يكره الأقدار متعوب. سلم وفوض لحكم الله محتسبا، فإنما الأمر مقضي ومكتوب. والله يقضي بما شاء وكيف يشاء، والعبد عبد ومخلوق ومربوب. ولم يزل ربه الرحمن يكلأه باللطف والحفظ محفوف ومصحوب. حسن ظنونك بالرب الكريم، ولا تسيء ظنا فتبقى عنه محجوب. واعمل لنفسك أعمالا تسر بها، فكل ما يفعل الإنسان محسوب. إن كان خيرا فخير سوف يحصده، أو كان شرا فتنكيل وتعذيب. يا ويل من ضيع الأعمار في زلل، وكل من كسبه الآثام والحوب. واطلب علوما مع اقبال مع عمل، فأنت بالعلم والأعمال مطلوب. واحذر زمانك هذا.
Testing, test, mic test. Testing, testing, test. Test, test. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Alhamdulillah, we begin our lesson in the Kitab Sullam of Imam al-Akhdari in Mantiq by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inshallah, and we pray that Allah make this lesson and your reason, may our sins are forgiven, our prayers are answered inshallah ta'ala. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us and with the understanding, and bless us and with iman and taqwa. Ameen ya rabbal alameen. So inshallah we will continue from where we stopped in the chapter of Qiyas. And in our last lesson we were speaking about the meaning of Qiyas and the types of Qiyas. So in the last lesson we mentioned that there are two types of Qiyas. So this is where the author speaks about Qiyas al-Iqtirani and Qiyas Istisna'i. This is in the first part where he says ثم القياس عندهم قسمان فمنه ما يدعى بالاقتران وهو الذي دل على النتيجة بقوة واختص بالحملية، فإن تريد تركيبه فركب مقدماته على ما وجب ورتب المقدمات وانظر صحيحها من فاسد مختبرا. ورتب المقدمات. After that he mentioned فإن لازم المقدمات بحسب المقدمات آتي وما من المقدمات سرى فيجب اندراجها في الكبرى وذات حد أصغر سراهما وذات حد أكبر كبرهما. I will just this is what we have covered last week, and then lastly he mentioned وأصغر فذاك ذو اندراج ووسط يلغى لدى الإنتاج. So basically I gave some examples, so let us look at what is meant by the author saying on the minor and the major premise. So we mentioned that we spoke about premises when it comes to Qiyas, and we have the premise and we have the conclusion. So the minimum number of premise, and we mentioned that there must be at least two premise. And then there is this natija. So Qiyas and Iqtirani, the premises in such a way that we are able to derive the conclusion. By the presence of what is called as haddul wasat, the middle what you call it, word, where it is the reason for the binding of the two premise. So let us look at this example again. This is the example we gave. Kullu insan hayawan wa kullu hayawan jismun. Then the natija is kullu insanin jismun. So now we have the haddul asrar. Haddul asrar is the one that is in yellow. This is the subject of the natija. So that's why I put this color as such. The subject, if the subject of the natija is in a particular proposition, so we say this is the muqaddima as-surah. This is the minor muqaddima. The minor muqaddima is where the subject of the natija is in. So when we say kullu insan hayawan wa kullu hayawan jism, kullu insan jism. So now you have the subject of the natija. Where does the subject of the natija lies in the premise? It is in the first premise. So we say this is the muqaddima as-surah. So this particular word, this is haddul asrar. In Mantiq we call it haddul asrar. Haddul asrar. It is the minor. It is the minor word. And then you have the word hayawan, and if you see in red, it is repeated into both the premise. So whenever there is this repetition in all of the premises, we call it haddul awsat. So it is the middle word. The middle word is the thing as what I mentioned, and it is the one that is binding the first premise to the second premise. Now this is important for us to take note. In order for us to say that the natija can be derived, there must be binding. So in the previous lessons we mentioned there are some form of arguments that you cannot deduce the natija from it. You cannot deduce the conclusion. So if you cannot deduce the conclusion from an argument, meaning it is a false argument. It is a false argument. So good arguments are arguments that you are able to deduce the natija. This is the meaning of qiyas iqtirani. It is deductive argument that you are able to deduce the natija, the conclusion. So this is called haddul wasat or awsat, the middle word, the thing that is binding the two premise. And then you have haddul akbar, or we say al-kubra. So what is the meaning of haddul akbar? If you look here, this is the predicate of the natija. So the predicate of the natija, this is what we mention as al-haddul akbar. So there are three things number here for us to take note. We have haddul asrar, the word insan, haddul wasat or haddul awsat, we have the word hayawan, and then we have haddul akbar, the word jism. So in this type of argument, we say kullu insan hayawan wa kullu hayawan jism. Then we can deduce from this argument kullu insan jism. So this is some terminologies, and I hope we can memorize them, because after this we are going to speak any more about the types of syllogism, or the types of arguments. So we have to be familiar with what is haddul asrar, what is haddul awsat, and what is haddul akbar. So let me just run through the examples before we go back to our matan. So the author is going to speak about 4 types of syllogism, and these 4 types of syllogism in deductive logic, these are the syllogism that can produce the natija, meaning this kind of syllogism is a valid syllogism, it is a valid form of argument. So these are the 4 types that the author mentioned. So let us look at the first type. He call it Ashkal awwal, the first type. The first type, kullu insan hayawan, kullu hayawan jism, kullu insan jism. This is like the example I gave earlier. So what is the thing about the first type of syllogism? You find that the haddul awsat, and you pay attention to the haddul awsat. In the first premise, the haddul awsat is the predicate of the proposition. It is the predicate. The subject is kullu insan. Hayawan, it is a predicate. So in the first premise, it is a predicate of the first premise, but when comes into the second premise, it is the subject. So this is called Ashkal awwal. So Shaklul awwal basically the haddul awsat in the first premise is the predicate, second premise is the subject. So whenever you have this you have this natija. Whereas the second type, we call it Shaklul thani, and if you look here, the haddul awsat both premise are the predicate. Both premise are the predicate. Kullu insan hayawan la shay'a min al hajari bi hayawan. So if you look the word hayawan, it is a predicate of the first premise, and also it is the predicate of the second premise. So this is predicate. Whereas the first shakl, the first time, it is the predicate of the first premise, but it is the subject of the second premise. So if the haddul awsat is like this is shaklul awwal. If the haddul awsat both of it are in the as the predicate of all the premise, then this is a shaklul thani, and this is the example. If both of the haddul awsat is the subject of both premise, now this is shaklul thalith. This is in the third type, and the last type is what you call it, it is the opposite of the first shakl, where haddul awsat in the first premise is the subject of the first premise, and it is the predicate of the second premise. This is the opposite of the first. We say the first premise it is a predicate, and it is the subject of the second premise. Whereas shaklul rabi', the fourth type, it is the opposite. It is the subject of the first premise and predicate of the second premise. So these are the 4 types of syllogism that can give natija. And the author mentioned that the first type is the strongest. Is the strongest form of qiyas, followed by the second, followed by the third, followed by the fourth. So now let us look at what the author mentioned. Earlier I read and all this we covered in our last lesson. Last lesson basically we spoke about what is the meaning of haddul asrar, haddul awsat, haddul akbar, and then the author speaks about the validity of the propositions, how we arrange the premises. So as what we mentioned earlier, arrangement of the premises is crucial, so that we are able to derive the conclusion if the premises are arranged properly. And we have to look for haddul awsat, the middle word, for us to bind the premises together. So now we will, this is the class, our lesson for today. We are going to speak about the Ashkal, and basically Ashkal is the types of syllogism. So the author mentioned Ashklu inda haula innas yutlaqu an qadiyatay Qiyas. So he began by speaking what is the meaning of Shakal, and he said that the Manatiq, the scholars of Mantiq and Annas, when they speak about Shakal, and he said qadiyatay Qiyas, yani the two premises of the Qiyas, the two premises of the arguments. Min ghairi an tu'tabar al aswar, without we take into consideration the aswar, kullu and ba'du. This is called the what you call it, the sur, the sur, kullu insan. This is, we say, qadiyya musawwara, kullu insan hayawan, kullu insan hayawan. So this is an example of qadiyya musawwara. So musawwara, we have the universal and the particulars. So if you take out the universal and the particulars, this is what we call a shakal. But if you put the universal and particulars, and it becomes darbun. So there are two things here. We have shaklun and we have darbun. What is the difference? Shaklun, there is no universal, there is no particular. Whereas darbun, there is universals and there is particular. And you can see the word all and some. So this is called darbun. But if you take out the universals and the particulars, and it is called shakal. This is what basically the author mentioned. Idhaka bid-darbi, he said that if there is sur or aswar, that it is any term as ad-darb. Lahu ma yuthar. Walil muqaddimati, so he mentioned that the premises they have ashkalun faqat arba'atun. So they are the four types of Qiyas, the four types of Qiyas, as what I showed earlier, some examples. Bihasabil haddil wasat. So again here we are speaking about where is the haddil wasat, where is the word that the middle word that is binding the premises together. So then he goes on to speak about the four types of Qiyas. So he mentioned hamlun bisurra wa wad'uhu bikubra. So hamlun bisurra wa wad'uhu bikubra. So in Arabic, what we mentioned, we have the word mawdu' and mahmul. Mawdu' is the subject, mahmul is the predicate. So here he mentioned the first premise, haddul wasat is the hamlun, the mahmul, that is the predicate. Whereas the next premise, the second premise, wad'uhu bikubra, then it is the subject of the second premise. So the first shakal, haddul wasat, consists of the predicate of the first premise, whereas in the second premise it is the subject. So this is the first shakal. And then he mentioned yuda'a bi shaklin awwalin. So this is the first shaklin awwal. Wa yudra wa hamluhu fil kulli. If both premises mahmul, the haddul wasat is the mahmul. This is what the author is saying. Now this is sani and urif. This is the second shakal. So what is the meaning? Let me show you again the example. This example I mentioned the aswar here. But it's okay. If you take out the aswar, what you call it, we can understand the meaning. So this is shakul awwal, and that's what we mentioned. Where is the predicate of haddul wasat? The predicate is in the first premise, whereas the subject is in the second premise. As far as the second type is concerned, both of the haddul wasat is in both of the haddul wasat for both premises is the predicate of both premises, whereas the third shakal, both of it are the mawdu', that is the subject of both premises. And then when the fourth type comes, it is the opposite of the first, which later on we will I will just show inshallah. So this is basically what the author is saying. He said wa wad'uhu fil kulli. So if the haddul wasat is in the mawdu' of both premises, it is the third shakal. So the difference between the second and the third is that the second, both of premise, the haddul wasat is the predicate, Whereas the third type, both of the premise, the haddul wasat is the subject. So you have haddul wasat the subject, and you had haddul wasat the predicate. So this is the difference between the third shakal and the second shakal. Whereas the fourth shakal, what did he say? He said warabiul ashkali aksul awwali. The fourth type of syllogism, it is the opposite of the first. So what is the opposite of the first? Let us look again at this example. As for the first, where is the haddul wasat? In the first premise, it is the predicate. In the second premise, it is the subject. So the fourth one is the opposite. So how we know any opposite? Now the first shakal, the haddul wasat is the predicate, but now it is the subject. So it is the opposite, correct or not? It is the opposite of the first shakal. So this is the subject, whereas the second premise, where is the haddul wasat? The haddul wasat is in the predicate. So this is where the author mentioned. The author he said warabiul ashkali aksul awwali. The fourth shakal is the opposite of the first, when it comes to the subject and the predicate pertaining to the haddul wasat. Wahiya ala tartibi fit takammuli. So it is based on this tertib, this sequence. It is based on this sequence. We will get the natija. We will get the correct natija, and it is based on the sequence shakul awwal, shakul thani, shakul thalith, shakul rabi', which is the stronger. So meaning based on the sequence, the first shakal is stronger than the second is stronger than the third is stronger than the fourth. So when we understand these four things, we will understand how are we able to build any strong argument. So the strongest is the first type. So whenever we speak about arguments, so we always look at shakal awwal, if possible, if not shakal thani, if not shakal thalith, if not what you call it, shakal rabi'. So all these types of syllogism are correct. We are able to deduce the natija, but the first is stronger than the second, and second is stronger than the third, and the third is stronger than the fourth. Although their opinions amongst the Manatiqa that mention that the fourth is stronger than the fourth is stronger than the first. So this is basically our lesson today, inshaAllah ta'ala, for us to understand what is the meaning of the four types of syllogism. So again, we have these four: shakul awwal, shakul thani, shakul thalith, shakul rabi'. So all these things it depends on the haddul wasat. Where is the haddul wasat? So inshallah ta'ala, in our next lesson, we will go on further to discuss on the conditions of each of this syllogism, because the author mentioned some of the condition, where he say he mentioned fahaythu an hadha nidami yu'dalu fafasidun nidami wa amma al-awwalu fashartuhu al-ijabu fi surahu wa antura kulliyatan kubrahu. So he is going to speak about the conditions of the first shakal. We will speak about what are the conditions when it comes to positive sentences and negative sentences in the first premise, in the second premise. Then we speak about the issue of universals and particulars, and how it affects arguments, and how it affects the natija, and what are the conditions, and so on and so forth. So we will go one by one, inshallah. In the first shakal, what are the conditions of the first type, what are the conditions of the second type and third type, and so on. Wallahu a'lam bis-sawab. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Allahumma salli wa sallim ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali sayyidina Muhammad. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanah wa fil akhirati hasanah wa qina adhaban nar. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.